HB353 by Patterson relating to creating the criminal offense of trespass on or near school or daycare center property.
Chair has Mr. Patterson.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
would the gentleman yield for questions?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
I do.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson, may I just ask you some legislative intent questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. Your bill would create a new criminal offense, correct?
Yes.
And that criminal offense would be for people who remain within 250 feet of property that is adjacent to a public school or private daycare, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And this 250 feet could include private property and public property, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And for private property, the person would need permission to be there.
I'm sorry, could you repeat did you say public or private? That's
Private.
only part of
I'm sorry,
this.
for private
property. Well, they could be there without permission, but if they're asked to leave and given notice, if they're loitering and asked to leave, they need to leave the premises.
Who gets to ask them to leave?
Just 1 second, it's right here. They have to leave unless they have a reasonable relationship for entering or remaining on the property that involves custody or the responsibility of a student enrolled in the school or daycare, if they have written permission from an authorized representative of the school or daycare center, receives a reasonable request to depart by an administrator, educator, or security personnel officer employed by the school or daycare center.
Now, just to be clear, we're talking about private property that is not a part of school property or the daycare property, correct?
Yeah, let me tell you where this bill came about. So I have a mom in my district that brought this idea forward because there's this creepy dude that hangs out right next to the daycare playground and sits there and watches the kids all day to the point where the kids don't even feel safe to be on the playground. The teachers actually don't take the kids onto the playground when this gentleman is present. And so what this bill aims to do is to make it where if someone's being a creep around a daycare or a school, that they can have a reasonable request to leave, and if they don't leave, then the police can get involved. Currently, the police are unable to ask anyone to leave because it's not their property, and in these high dense growth areas, you've got daycares that are part of a larger development where it may not necessarily be their property 1 foot outside the gate of the playground.
So I want to be clear. Let's say there's a daycare on one side of the street and a different private property on the other side of the street within 250 feet.
Yes.
If there is somebody that is on that second private property and people at the school don't want them there, but the owners of that second private property says they're perfectly fine there, that would be an offense.
Yes.
Okay. Now, can I do a second scenario with you?
Yes.
Let's talk about public property. If, let's say, around a public school, across the street, there are other businesses within 250 feet. And there are people who use those businesses, but they're on the public sidewalk. And some of them like to hang out on the public sidewalk and hang around because that's their constitutional right to be in public spaces and meet. If the school or the private daycare did not want them on public property and they call the police could now arrest them for being on public property.
I don't think that that's a reasonable example.
Okay. So let me ask it again. Let me change some of the scenarios. I mean, somebody is saying, strike that. Let me put it this way. I have personally seen Second Amendment advocates who wear their open carry firearms and walk around public spaces, including in front of schools, to make a point that this state has open carry and the right to be in public spaces. If somebody was uncomfortable at the daycare, and they say, the guy who keeps walking around our building, around this block, with a pistol on his hip, that guy's creeping me out, the police can now come and remove him and arrest him if he refuses to leave.
No,
Why not?
because in your scenario, they didn't give him notice.
Okay. They gave him notice. He says, it is my constitutional right to be in a public space with my firearm for the purpose of drawing attention. I refuse to leave. Can the police arrest him now?
Potentially.
Under your bill, can the police arrest him if they chose?
Potentially.
Okay. Is that what you intend for your bill?
What I intend for my bill is that we don't have creeps hanging out outside school playgrounds and daycare playgrounds.
Absolutely.
Making teachers and students uncomfortable. And so that's why this is a very reasonable setback of 250 feet. I believe the Senate bill has 500 feet, and I hope to get that into alignment. But this is a very reasonable setback, in my view, as the bill's author, to protect these kids from folks that may wish to do them harm.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree that it's a reasonable thing to do. I do disagree that it's a constitutional thing to do.
Yes, sir.
So I think we'll agree to disagree on that point.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
I move to reduce the writing the conversations on this bill for the purposes of legislative intent and place it in the journal.
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there objection? Chair is none so ordered. Mr. Schatzline, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Gentleman yield for questions?
I do.
Gentleman yields for questions.
Representative, I'm 100% in support of this bill. Were you aware that a armed protester repeatedly for weeks stood outside of my daughter's preschool to taunt her in Fort Worth, Texas?
I was not aware of that.
This has happened over and over and over, and because of the sidewalk that's public property, the police could not ask him to leave. So this bill, what you're seeking to do is create a mechanism by which police can give warning and say, hey, you're making the teachers and students feel uncomfortable. We are asking that you leave. So they would not be arrested at first. They would actually receive warning, and then if they chose to stay, it would be seen as direct defiance and wanting to make those students uncomfortable. Is that correct?
I agree, and I think that's a more reasonable scenario that the police have zero tools to get involved in this currently, and I do believe that that's how the vast majority of police officers would handle that situation.
Representative Patterson, for the sake of the kids in my city and in your city, I'm incredibly grateful that you brought this bill forward.
Thank you.
Can't wait to support it.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield?
The gentleman yield for questions.
No.
I
Yes,
thought
I'm
I
just
heard
kidding.
something.
The gentleman does yield for questions.
I thought I heard something. I just want to make sure. Did I hear you say that if I have private property and I allow someone to be on my private property because it's my property and property rights matter, and there's a school by my property and the people at the school don't like the person on my private property, that the school gets to decide who I can have on my private property, and if they don't get off my private property, then they can be arrested?
I'm sorry, I may have misunderstood Mr. Wu's question. The bill's about public property.
So the bill doesn't allow the police to arrest people who are on private property. Is that accurate?
Well, it says that, all buildings, all land and buildings owned or leased by a school or daycare center and any grounds or buildings on which an activity sponsored by the school or daycare center is being conducted. The daycare center is, defined in section 42.002 of the Human Resources Code, and it discusses public property.
I still thought I heard something. So my question is this. If I have private property that's within that foot range of the daycare, and they don't like the person on my private property because it's within the limits, are you telling me that they get to decide who I have on my private property?
No, I don't believe so.
No, you don't think so, or absolutely not, because your property rights matter?
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Members, this bill is simple. This is adults who want to intimidate and threaten children and teachers at daycare centers and at schools. This gives police the tools to remove those individuals, and I move passage.
Question occurs on final passage. Record vote. Clerk, ring the bell. Mr. Leach voting aye. Mr. Alcott voting aye. Have all members voted? 124 ayes and 10 nays. House Bill 353 is finally passed.